Final score at Celtic Park, Celtic 5, Kilmarnock 1, and Celtic now within touching distance of a fourth successive Premiership title. This is Tino with the Final Whistle show. Another solo one this morning, kind of punchy, 25, maybe 30 minutes as we try and cover all the action from yesterday. And the big challenge for Celtic, as we know, was a response. That's what Brendan Rodgers demanded after the really kind of sluggish and disappointing effort last Sunday against St Johnstone. And that's exactly what we got. Celtic came flying out the traps. 5 brilliant goals, really well worked. Good team goals, good individual finishes. And it's the perfect response ahead of a further game against St Johnstone next week in the Scottish Cup semi-final. But we'll get to all of that throughout this week's coverage. But in the meantime, let's focus on yesterday against Kilmarnock. Celtic made 4 changes to start with. So Liam Scales come back in. Wee bit of a surprise to see that. But my chat pre-match on Friday was that at this moment in time, Brendan Rodgers doesn't seem to know who his preferred partner to Cameron Carter-Vickers is. It's been Trusty, Nawrocki came in, Dane Murray less so, he's on the periphery at this moment in time. But Liam Scales comes back from his injury, I think it was a facial injury that he'd picked up, and goes right back in. But next week it could be Trusty again, and there could be further changes. I think at the moment it's a bit of a problem position. It's a bit of a one for addressing in the summer. I don't think it's a position that will affect us in terms of our treble ambitions, but it is something that's clearly not sitting quite right with the manager at this moment in time. But for yesterday, it was Liam Scales that came back in. Greg Taylor came back in. Nice moment pre-match. You might have seen he brings out his newborn baby. Don't know if the baby was the official mascot on the day, but a really nice touch for Greg Taylor and his family. He returns to the starting lineup and he brings the wee one out pre-match, which was great to see. He's back in. James Forrest is back in. And Adam Ida gets his place up top. Out go Austin Trusty, Jeffrey Schlupp, Jota and Nicholas Kuhn. And I think the manager, and we'll all have seen his frustration post-match at at St Johnstone. We knew he was going to make changes. He kind of had to make changes. He can't be accepting that kind of performance, that kind of result. And that's what played out on the day. Maybe a wee bit harsh on Jota, but you've got to shake up, and that's exactly what he done. When we'd done the pre-match on Friday, the key to this one for me was scoring early. Kilmarnock obviously come with a game plan of just parking the bus, sitting in deep and seeing if they can maybe steal something on the break. Similar-ish to St Johnstone's game plan, I suppose, whether it's through a set piece or something of that nature. But 9 minutes in, that game plan goes, and it's Reo Hatate. And I just want to focus on Reo Hatate for a moment because we've spent quite a bit of time on him. I described him on Friday as a hot topic. We spoke about him during last week's Celtic Exchange Weekly. And with Reo Hatate, it's the consistency that's become the issue. The talent is never in question. And I don't think his attitude's ever in question either. He's maybe quite low-key in terms of his body language, but I don't think he ever gives less than 100%. He's a very committed player in terms of what he brings to this Celtic side. But yeah, it can blow a wee bit hot and cold, and that's the biggest frustration. Certainly a frustration for fans, and no doubt for Brendan Rodgers, because he'll see every day at Lennoxtown just what this guy offers. But we've seen the best of him yesterday. It was brilliant to see. And he opens the scoring 9 minutes, and I think it is. And it's a really clever one too with Greg Taylor. Taylor finds himself in that position. And I've been so mixed on Greg Taylor in terms of what he brings and what he doesn't bring to the party. What he does do is he plays to instruction. He's clearly coached into being this inverted fullback who can at times find himself in pockets in various areas of the midfield. And if you watch the 1-2 that Reo Hatate plays with him, Greg Taylor's on the edge of the box. He's in the kind of number 10 position, maybe the number 8, but he's very high up the park. It's a really cute layoff back into Hatate's path, and Hatate's still got work to do, but as he takes that first touch out his feet, the whole thing just opens up, and it's just a confident, crashing, curling finish in at the top corner, and it's great to see, and you can see how delighted Hatate was. I know we don't hear much from Reo Hatate, whether it's him or Maeda, they're men of few words in terms of their interviews, and I don't know if their English is maybe better than they let on at times, but they're fairly low-key characters, but you could see the delight on Reo Hatate's face, and it was just a perfect response from him personally to some of the backlash that he'll have got, whether he looks into it or catches that kind of flack too much, they'll be aware that there was negative words doing the rounds after last week, and I think Reo Hatate had a really strong response to that, and it was brilliant to see. 2 minutes later, you're good to go, and it's Dyson Maeda with his 31st goal of the season. Read the stat this morning. I think he's scored now on his last 8 home league starts. It's just really consistent, really impressive form by Dyson Maeda. But actually, again, it's a really good team goal. Celtic are... I just thought they were so much quicker with their play. You know, we've seen what we've called the horseshoe of death, the real slow, patient, let's call it boring build-up. We have seen at times this season. That was gone yesterday, and I think Celtic were... It looked like they were almost under instruction to take no more than 2 touches. You know, it was popping it off 1 and 2 touches, great movement. That kind of football can only work with the movement and hard work off the ball. If the guy that gets the ball doesn't have an option, then that's why he needs to take a 3rd and a 4th and a 5th touch and so on. That wasn't the case yesterday. The movement ahead of the defenders, ahead of the midfielders was there to see, and no more so than with this second goal. Celtic are popping about, as I say. Kilmarnock are very deep, camped in. Looks like there's no way through. James Forrest is involved in the build-up, a nice flick into Arne Engels' path. There's a bit of a clamour, a bit of noise at the time in the stadium for him to shoot. You can hear it, watch the highlights. There's almost a frustration that he doesn't shoot. He waits, then he plays the pass into St Johnstone. It's a great pass. It just cuts open the defence. Johnson's got work to do, fires it into a really dangerous area at the back post. Kilmarnock can't quite clear it, and Dyson Maeda, I can't believe his luck. He's got a tap-in for goal number 31 of the season. It's a shame that Johnson won't get the assist because of the block by the Kelly defender, but so be it. It's 2-0 and you're absolutely good to go. And don't need to dwell on the fact that Dyson Maeda is just loving life at Celtic just now. You can see in his face, he's got the new haircut yesterday. Don't know if that makes a blind bit of difference, but he's just really enjoying his football right now. And he does, you know, arriving at the back post is the difference between him playing left wing and centre forward. He's really effective at both. And the debate will rage on as to where his number one position is, where his optimal position is. But there's no doubt when he comes in off that left-hand side and the pace that he can arrive at the back post at as much as anything is a real threat. He's almost impossible to pick up. I like him there. I do think if we sign a really good centre forward, I think we should sign a forward in the summer, then he would end up spending most of his time back out in the wing. But we'll see. That's a different discussion for a different day. So it's 2-0 Celtic and you're good to go. On the 21st minute, Cameron Carter-Vickers strides forward, and it was almost, again, there was a bit of a maybe an insincere call for him to shoot. You know, you're 2-0 up, you're cruising. The game feels like it's almost in the bag at that point. You're in full control. And he's pulled the trigger, which is something he doesn't often do, and he's at least a full 25 yards out. And it's an incredible finish. It flies into the top left-hand corner. And what you see is an incredulous response from his teammates. You know, Adam, he does get the hands in the head, and Alistair Johnson. I think Alistair Johnson put a message out last night on Instagram saying that he still thinks it was a cross. All these things, a lot of fun, and it's good to see. You know, there's obviously a bit of spirit in this Celtic camp, and you can't deny they'll have been stung by the criticism last week, and the criticism is fully warranted. By the way, it's that's life at Celtic, or you know, wherever you play your football, you cannot put in abject performances like that and not expect to get criticism. And my biggest gripe about Celtic last week, and it kind of echoes Brendan Rodgers' words, the best players, the top players, they're on it from minute one. Celtic kind of waited till half-time last week and then had a real go the last 20 minutes or whatever. It's too late. So, you know, by that point, if you start to miss a couple of chances, tension kicks in, players end up, you know, playing with tension and playing with anxiety, and that's not going to get you the result you want. And I think Celtic will have learned from that. You know, the proof is in the pudding. We did not start last week at St Johnstone. You know, after 21 minutes here, we're 3 goals up, and there's another one just on the way. But it's great to see the team spirit, and the boys were clearly enjoying themselves on the day. Before we continue, just a huge thanks to everyone who continues to join us here on the live, particularly on a Sunday morning when it's nice and sunny out and there's plenty of other things you could be doing. But there's loads of time for that, so don't worry. Good to see some familiar faces here in the comments. John Wilson, Fred Williams, Gaza West, Pat McLaughlin, and various others. Let me know any comments or questions between now and the end of the piece. I'll do my very best to get to them. Let's see. Pat says here, I don't think many people would be moaning about Hatate if he'd been taking the penalties. His numbers would be far better. His numbers are good, Pat. We'll get to it in just a second. Hatate's obviously the man that gets the fourth goal on the day, which is his fourth goal, his second goal, and it's his 10th goal of the season for Celtic. And that's his best return in a Celtic shirt for a season. He got 9 in the 22-23 season under Ange. He's now one better than that, and there's still 6, maybe, hopefully 7 games to go. So there's every chance he'll add to that, and he seems in good form after yesterday. John Wilson absolutely says that was more like it. Lubo's LP, he's saying Maeda's the first to do it since Larsson. First to do what? Not sure what that is. You can maybe let us know. Various other comments coming in. Let us know what you think between now and the end of the show. There is a comment on Greg Taylor from Eugene. He says, Taylor plays that inverted role so good. He becomes a nuisance to opposing teams who don't know how to deal with him. And that's exactly it, because Celtic line up in this 4-3-3, and it's something that was lacking in the Rangers game. There's no doubt about it. We end up getting overloaded in the midfield. But it's a 4-3-3 to start with. But then when we find ourselves on the ball, particularly across the back line, Taylor just finds himself in that central defensive midfield role alongside Callum McGregor. So it gives you 2 there and 2 further up, usually Engels and Hatate. Makes a huge difference to what Celtic can do into the space they find. So if Greg Taylor moves on, and it looks very likely that he is going to move on, we'll need to find someone that does that kind of job. And I don't think it's Kieran Tierney. I don't think it's his role, and I don't want it to be his role. I think Kieran Tierney is so effective and most effective at bombing up and down that left-hand side. And it's an interesting one for the manager, but it's clearly an important part of what he wants to do. When Jeffrey Schlupp came on in the second half, he was also playing the inverted role. So it is something that Rodgers seems to favour, but I don't think it's a KT role, so we'll need to see what happens there. On a side note, good to see KT starting for Arsenal yesterday. They drew 1 each with Brentford. He himself had a decent game, had a goal chopped off as well, which he'd have loved to have got. But I think it was his first start, somebody said, in 22 months in terms of league stuff. Not sure, that seems a lot, but anyway, good to see KT back in action there. And hopefully he's in good shape by the time he returns to Celtic. In terms of that 4th goal, as I say, it's Ray Hatate, his second of the game, and it's another really clever one too. It's between James Forrest and Alistair Johnston. Again, Celtic are probing, and at times this season we've found that frustrating, and it's maybe sometimes goes all the way back to CCV or even the goalkeeper. This time around, I think it's Arnie Engels gets out on the right, there's patient build-up. All of a sudden, Johnson finds it, gives it to James Forrest, and it's just a really cute touch back in, gives Johnson the chance to cut it back, cuts it back to Hatate, gets it out his feet and drills it low. It's 4-0 Celtic. If it wasn't done by then, it absolutely was after that one, and Celtic are good to go. And I think at that stage, the fans were, they were due a performance. The Celtic fans always will turn up in their numbers. And I think there was a frustration and a disappointment from all that there was so many Celtic fans in attendance at St Johnstone last week, somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000. And I spoke to a few guys yesterday who were at the game, and they've come away very disappointed. And I don't usually get too negative or too upset at times. Well, sometimes, but I was so frustrated last week. I thought it was so disappointing. But all you can do, you can't turn back the clock on it, and all you can do is respond next time around. And I thought the players absolutely done that, and the fans enjoyed it. Chatting to a lot of folk around us yesterday, and particularly first half. We'll get to the second half, a bit of a different story, but particularly first half, it was so enjoyable for all concerned. Pat makes the right comment. The first 25 minutes were devastating, absolutely. Eugene adds, in terms of James Forrest, that Forrest has adapted his game, very clever, knows his limitations, but was crucial yesterday. And yeah, I think you can say that in a very positive sense. James Forrest, he's no longer the winger, the pacey winger that will burst to the byline and jink through various guys. But what is, he's a very competent footballer in terms of retaining. His first touch is class, so you can fire it into him, he'll kill it dead, and he'll retain possession, and he'll probe, and if the forward pass is on, he'll find it, and if not, he'll pop it back into his midfield and he'll keep ball. And I think it's a new James Forrest, it's a different James Forrest, but it's an important player for us, and he was as good as any yesterday. I think we'll get into the debate. Greg Taylor does get man of the match. Ray Hatate would certainly have had a shout for it. But I think James Forrest was very good on the day. I thought Callum McGregor was good. A lot of players were really good for Celtic. So there's lots to discuss. But James Forrest absolutely still has a part to play in this Celtic side. And the only wee disappointment, and hopefully it's something that's resolved in the games ahead, is that he's not yet got his goal for the season, which would take him to 16 consecutive seasons scoring for Celtic. But good to see James Forrest return to the starting lineup with a good performance. Jerry O'Donnell, good to see Jerry there. He says the changes gave us a big boost. They all played well. Forrest was really good and Taylor done well. Big Ida will need to start getting more involved in the play. I was going to get to Adam Ida a bit later on, and we can do it just now because he's involved in what would have been the fifth goal. It was a goal chopped off for offside. I know Kilmarnock scored in between times. I'll cover that quickly as well. I think he does played pretty well yesterday, Jerry. I thought he led the line well, and it's easy, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but it's easy to look at a 5-1 scoreline and say, but Big Ida didn't score again. And of course that's true, but I thought he played his part well in terms of leading the line, and it's important to have a number 9 who has the movement to create spaces for others. And yeah, ideally you want your number 9 to be your goal scorer, but I would suggest that the game has evolved as well, that that there's different debates, and you'll see Neville and these kind of guys having this discussion. Is the traditional number 9 a thing of the past? Guys like Alan Shearers and Chris Suttons and all that stuff. To a point, the big target man who gets you your 20, 30 goals isn't quite a thing. And you'll see it with so many teams in the modern game. It's the goals coming from the midfield and the wide areas. And RODGERS is a big advocate of spreading his goals throughout the team. And of course, Adam Ida, as a striker, will be disappointed not to have scored yesterday. Although he is having a reasonable goal-scoring season in general. I think he's got 14 for the season. And yes, he'll be disappointed, but I'd be quite sure that the manager will be fairly pleased with his performance from yesterday. I think it's his movement that creates the space, particularly for Maeda and others around him. And I think he done fairly well. I don't think there was anything put on a plate for him. I don't think he'd great service in terms of out-and-out chances. But he's done really well for this incident we're going to talk about, for the chopped off fifth goal. The ball's played into the centre of the goals, and it's just a really clever and subtle layoff into the path of Hatate. Hatate could have finished it. Keeper's made a good save. It breaks to Maeda, who crashes it in, and he thought he had his second for the day, and it's then called offside. I don't want to spend too much time debating the offside. There's various stills that are doing the rounds, and we can see where the lines have been drawn. There's a debate whether it's the line on Adam Ida is on the outside of his shoulder. The line on the Kelly defender seems to be on the inside. But these are lines that are drawn. I'm saying drawn. They're pulled together by the VAR officials. That's something they have to do manually. I think there's semi-automated lines that are drawn down in the English Premier League. We know that the VAR system and the whole setup here in Scotland is quite different, and it's open to opinion. That's the thing. I could be looking at it, and any of you guys watching would say, well, that line should be further out, that line should be further in. And when you start to fiddle about with millimetres and lines, it kind of defeats the purpose. That's not what offside was ever created for. So it's so marginal. Who knows? So at the moment, it's not quite working right. There'll be debates whether he was on or off. Who knows? But the official decision on the day was that Ida was off initially when he's made his run, and the fifth goal doesn't stand. So that's where you're at. But in terms of Adam Ida generally, I thought he was fine yesterday. I was watching him fairly closely, and I thought he'd done his job well as a number 9. Yes, he'd like to score, but I thought he played his part in what was overall a really brilliant team performance. Let me see if there's anything else on Ida. Yeah, Jerry thinks that he wasn't offside, that the fullback played him on, very possibly. Fred, I said it was open to interpretation. Fred's gone a wee bit further. He said it's open to manipulation. Maybe he's right, but let's not go down that rabbit hole at this moment in time. Pat adds to it by saying he's seen that someone got a goal chalked off a couple of weeks ago because his ear was offside. Rules are rules, Pat. That's the way it goes. But no, it does seem ridiculous, and let's hope there's some changes to that moving forward. I mentioned that Kilmarnock did get a goal. They got a goal back at 4-0 down, and it's Danny Armstrong that gets it. He's a decent player, but somebody was saying it's his first goal of the season, which is surprising. There was talk of him potentially making a move to Rangers. Don't know if that will materialise or not, but he is a decent player. But it's in one of Kilmarnock's rare attacks all day. You might have seen the stats. Celtic had 83% possession, and it felt like more than that. And Kilmarnock rarely troubled us at all. And they found themselves, or Armstrong found himself on the right-hand side. He's got out his feet, and he's just clipped it into an area. If he's been really honest, it's not an effort on goal. It's a cross towards the back post, and it's drifted in. And if we're being hypercritical, my initial feeling was that Sinisalo could have done better. His positioning could be better, and I think it's the kind of goal that he will probably learn from. Him and Stevie Woods and even Kasper Schmeichel, they'll do their own assessment of the game at some point. They'll go through the clips and whatever and look at where they could improve. And I think he's just not quite got his positioning right on that occasion, and it's drifted over him, and it's 4-1. It's not, and never was, going to have any material impact in the game, but it's a wee bit disappointing to to lose a goal, particularly if you predicted 4-0 pre-match like myself and various others. But so be it. It's 4-1, and it's a small bit of respite for Kilmarnock, but not anything that was going to have a big impact. As I say, we play out the half. We have that fifth goal ruled off for offside just before the break, and that's us. But you're into half time, and spirits are high, and people are feeling good again. And it was the perfect, but the only way to blow away the disappointment of last week. And I was chatting to some folks after the game, and the wee bit of disappointment was that yesterday could and maybe should have been title day, party day in terms of drawing a line under your season's efforts. But we'll need to wait a wee bit longer. We're recording here on Sunday morning. If Aberdeen beat Rangers today, highly possible, then Celtic are champions. If it's a draw or a Rangers win, it goes into next week. And on that note, I'm not sure. A few folk have asked me when the split fixtures will be. I would presume tomorrow, Monday. No reason why they couldn't get things in play then. And I know they'll consult with police and different things. We'll probably get into this in tomorrow's weekly show. I think it's a real gripe of mine, and for many others, that Scottish football tie themselves in knots to make the last Glasgow derby of the season a dead rubber. Whether you like it or not, and we can debate away fans at these games and stuff, this is our biggest game. This is our biggest selling point. It's our most exciting game. It's the game that we as fans generally look forward to the most. Yet Scottish football make a concerted effort to downplay it. We'll make it a non-important game. We'll have it a difficult kick-off time. We'll make sure there's nothing at stake. And I think this all goes back to, is it 1999, the game where Hugh Dallas gets hit with a coin and then makes a very dubious penalty decision and Rangers celebrate on the park, all those things. And yeah, there was trouble in that day, and that's not great to see. Nobody wants that or any sort of return to that. But when you're actively taking the excitement out of your product, that's a terrible place to be. And, they talk about they want to make sure there's nothing at stake, there's nothing to play for, and that's the target. Well, what about the Scottish Cup final last season? You get into that, what was it, a 3 o'clock kickoff at Hampden in the sunshine in May, 50-50 split of tickets. That's your perfect recipe for bedlam. And lo and behold, it generally doesn't happen. And it's there to be policed and stewarded, and the fans and supporters, players, and everyone's got a responsibility to keep a lid on it and to behave themselves. But you play out a game like that and it's absolutely fine. So why can we then go from that to completely diluting the fourth Glasgow derby of the season? I just think it's a nonsense. I really do. It's such an exciting game, for both sets of fans and for the neutral, and we continually downplay it. I've gone off on a tangent there, but lo and behold, the fixtures will come out tomorrow or Tuesday, and they'll do their very best to make it a meaningless one. It will probably be game 3 or game 4, something like that, depending on what happens at Pittodrie today. Anyway, that'll be that. Getting into the second half, I think Pat had mentioned earlier on there that he was thinking it was going to be 7-0, and I think that was a hope for everybody. But I think the way the first half played out, it was probably never going to be the case. Kilmarnock absolutely had to just camp in and hope for the very best. They were a wee bit more disciplined in their shape in the second half. And from a Celtic point of view, it was just harder to break down. They were still trying and probing, and as I say, we had all that possession. The stat came out, let me see this stat. Celtic made 1,022 passes on the day, and it's the most passes Celtic have made since records began. Don't know when that was, but that is outrageous. Over 1,000 passes in a 93-minute game of football, something like that. And it really does, tell the story, and it tells you just how dominant Celtic were on the day. And in the second half, there was a bit of frustration, and it was nowhere near as exciting as the first half. It's going to be hard to match that first half. I thought the first half was great. It was a good half at Celtic Park, as we've seen in a while. Second half, just a wee bit, I don't know if turd is the word, that's a wee bit disrespectful to players. They were certainly trying to make things happen. You get Jota coming in the second half. He tried to make an impact. Nicholas Kuhn, I thought Nicholas Kuhn was really good when he came on. Specifically when he initially came on, he got the ball out on the right-hand side, and there was a really clever bit of skill to lift over the full-back's trailing leg, and he was trying to have an impact. And he's got a wee bit of, I don't know much of anything of Nicholas Kuhn as a personality. I've been to a couple of press conferences where he's spoken. He's just quite a low-key individual. He's quite kind of, calm and not too animated, not too excited. And that's just who some guys are. That's that's life. That's people's personalities. You can't change that. Can't all be, Jota's charismatic and various other guys like that. Kuhn's just quite a calm guy. But again, he's a young guy as well, and I've no doubt he sees the comments, he sees what's going on social media, and he'll have been annoyed, and he'll have been keen to show that he's still the very talented player that we've seen during the first half of this season. And I was quite strong on both Reo Hatate and Nicholas Kuhn in the pre-match show that I done on Friday. And I think they're two seriously talented players at Celtic, and I understand the criticism after a bad game or a bad performance. But Brendan Rodgers stressed, he was asked, was it a concern how some of the players played at St Johnstone? He said it's a concern if it's over a longer period of time, if it becomes a pattern. And I think, yeah, you can have spells where form goes, and for a young winger like Nicholas Kuhn, for example, that can very much be the case. But I think the talent is there for all to see, and I'd really love Nicholas Kuhn to kick on and remain at Celtic for at least another season, maybe longer. And then if he moves on, and he's got the talent to move on, then so be it. But I thought he'd done well when he came on. So Kuhn came on for Forest. That was in 60 minutes. Same time, Jota comes in for Adam Ida, and Jeffrey Schlupp comes in for Greg Taylor. And Greg Taylor, as I said, did get man of the match, and he had a very good game, and credit to him. And I think it says a lot about Greg Taylor's mindset. I've spoken about the fact that you can never call Greg Taylor's attitude into question. You can talk about his ability and what he's able to do and what he's not able to do. I think his attitude's spot on. And having been out the Celtic side, let me see if I can get this stat here, but having been out the Celtic side for so long, he never played. He had 5 games between after Celtic's defeat at Hibs. He came off at half time. He spent the next 5 games not getting a minute, didn't play a minute of football, and then he gets the second half at St Johnstone last week, and he starts again yesterday, and he picks up man of the match. And I think that says a lot about his character, because if time is running down in his Celtic career, and there's, as I say, only 6-7 games left, it would be, it'd be easy for Greg Taylor to say, well, do you know what? I'll just see things out. I'll make sure I'm not getting injured first and foremost, and I'll just play safe. And I don't think he'd done that. And I think he showed his character by stepping up and basically saying that as long as he's here at Celtic, he'll absolutely give his all. And I thought he'd done that yesterday, and he can take great pride in his performance. So fair play to Greg Taylor for that. And as I say, he did pick up the man of the match in the stadium. Further changes, let me see. Tony Ralston comes in on 76 minutes for Alistair Johnson. I thought, again from the pre-match, I thought that Ralston may have started. I thought Alistair Johnson had been a wee bit in and out of things and not quite at his best. I thought Johnson had a very good game yesterday. He's linked up well. He's played a key part in at least 2 of the goals. And I think he can take great credit. But he gets his break, 76 minutes. Tony Ralston comes in, and we'll get back to Tony just shortly. And Luke McCowan comes in for Daizen Maeda on the 81st minute. And there was a lot of chat at that time about who was the centre forward, and it's a bit unclear. I'm just trying to double check. Yeah, so no Johnny Kenny on the bench, and certainly no Daniel Cummins. These guys are nowhere near it at this moment in time. But again, it maybe further highlights the lack of options at centre forward. It's Maeda or Ida and nothing else. And again, you can have that debate about what Celtic should or shouldn't have done in the transfer window in January when Kyogo left. But where we are at this moment in time, and it doesn't matter. There's no great concern when you're beating Kilmarnock 5-1, but it might be a concern if you've got a situation next week in the semi-final, or if we're fortunate enough to be there in the final, or in the last Rangers games. These are important games that remain for Celtic, and the manager will want to have good solid options. But you end up with Luke McCowan up through the middle effectively as the game's playing out. As I say, he came on in 81 minutes. The game is absolutely done at that point at 4-1, but there's not a genuine striker on the park for Celtic. So it's a wee bit concerning if you want to look at it like that. But yeah, right at there. The second half, not saying it's a hard watch, that's not the right words, but it was less exciting than the second half, let's call it that. So it was good to see a 5th goal go in, and I think everyone was delighted that it was Tony Ralston. Tony Ralston's such an honest and committed Celtic player, and a couple of comments coming in just now. Let me see. John Wilson saying that Tony got a well-deserved goal. Gaza West saying that he's surprised that he didn't start. And I think just he's a well-liked Celtic player. A lot of folks have got a lot of time for Tony Ralston because of just what he gives you. You know what he gives you, and you know how committed he is to what Celtic are doing. And it's a very decent goal. He's got the ball on the edge of the box, and he's turned the defender. He's just kind of shifted the ball out to his right-hand side, and he's cut it low across and into the side netting. And you might have seen a cheeky attempt by Jota to get on the end of it. And I'd need to watch it back, but I think Jota might have been offside had he got a touch on it. but Jota slid in at the back post, but it's evaded him, and it's Tony Ralston's goal, and you've seen the delight in Tony Ralston's face, and it just draws a line under a good performance, a really good performance, 5-1 Celtic, and you're absolutely good to go. A couple of comments from Brendan Rodgers after the game, paraphrasing a wee bit, but he said it was a brilliant reaction, much more like us, and this is a direct quote where he says, winning attitudes mixed with talent, and you get that performance. And that's it. The talent is never, ever in question for most, if not all of these guys at Celtic. There's so much ability on the park, but ability doesn't get you anywhere if the opponents are working harder, digging deeper, and showing more intensity. And unfortunately, that's what happened last week at St Johnstone. But I think Celtic responded exactly as you'd hope for this time around. We need to just glance ahead to next week. So obviously, it's a semi-final this time next week-ish. So I think it's 3 o'clock kickoff on Sunday at Hampden. It's against St Johnstone. We'll obviously, cover this and then some during the week. We'll touch on it tomorrow in the weekly show, and we'll get into it in more detail. We'll bring a preview out on Friday of this week, giving you a full detailed match preview for it. I think Celtic will hammer St Johnstone. I really, really do. And I think you'll get a similar tone and vibe from the players that you've seen against Kilmarnock in terms of the criticism stung, and St Johnstone, unfortunately, were the ones that caused that pain, if it's not too dramatic a word. And I think Celtic will be out to prove just how much stronger we are than St Johnstone and everyone else in this setup this time next week. I think Celtic will really come out flying. Hampden Park suits Celtic. I think the stat remains that Brendan Rodgers is still unbeaten at Hampden. It's something like 13, 14 games, semi-finals and finals. He just wins. That is the bottom line. And I would expect that to be the case next week. But that's one for covering during the week. We'll get into it in much more detail. In the meantime, thanks to the various comments that have come in. I've tried my best to get through as many as I can. Let me know any kind of final comments as we just start to wrap things up here. But great to see the various familiar faces joining us for this one. In terms of what we've got coming up this week, so let me see. We've got the weekly show tomorrow. That's Monday. And remember, it's only available on a Monday. If you're a member of the Celtic Exchange Plus, there is a link in the show notes to see how you can do so. You'll get early access, you can get ad-free access and various different things. So be sure to check that out. We'll be continuing with our CSC Stories series. Easy for me to say. There's been some really good episodes recently. We've done one with Los Angeles CSC, which was brought out on Wednesday. Paddy spoke to Stevie from the Manhattan CSC last week with the guys in Pittsburgh. We're lining up guys in Philly, Dubai, Boston, Texas. There's all sorts of stuff going on. It's a really good series. It's been really well received. So all going well. We'll continue with that this week. And then we'll have that preview on Friday for the game against St Johnstone. But in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your weekend. It's a Sunday. The sun is shining. Great performance. Great result for Celtic against Kilmarnock. Thanks for your support. We'll see you again really soon.